John Wolford, quarterback for the Los Angeles Rams, suffered a brutal hit to the neck in yesterday's game against the Seahawks, taking him to hospital. Let's talk about this injury in more detail. For those who don't know me, my name is Sonam, and I'm a resident doctor specializing in sports and exercise medicine. I want to take you through a play-by-play of Wolford's injury. We'll start off by taking a look at the play where Wolford sustained that head injury. So you can see, it's right here where Jamal Adams will hit Wolford. So we'll slow this down a little bit here. I'll talk to you about things I am worried about. So see, Wolford here is diving during this rush play, and this is where Jamal Adams will hit him in the head with this shoulder blade, or with this shoulder pad. And it's this contact here that's pretty worrisome. So kind of the head and the shoulder impacting and hitting the head downward. In medicine, we call that an axial load. It is extremely dangerous because of the structures that are contained within the cervical spine, and what I'm going to go over when we look at the 3D anatomy of the neck. So you'll see here, this is where he gets impacted. His neck actually is slightly turned this way. So the way he fell, he turned to the right, his head got impacted down, which means that there may be more of a compression on the right side of his neck versus the left. So I mean, a few good things here was that Wolford was able to still come to and walk off the field. If a player wouldn't get up after a neck injury like this is when you'd want to do your ABCs, but also stabilize the C-spine. And the reason why it's so important to make sure the C-spine is nice and steady is because if there is an injury to that area, it puts you at risk of paralysis and huge, huge complications. Ultimately, Wolford was transported to hospital in a collar. So if you look at this picture here, he's sitting in a collar in the actual ambulance. So this means that the team's physicians and trainers were concerned about the hit enough to protect his C-spine until they could get imaging. When someone suffers an axial load to the head, of course I'm going to be concerned about traumatic brain injury and concussions, but what I'm even more concerned about are injuries to the structures around the area, such as fractures to the cervical spine or dislocations to the cervical spine. We know that fractures or dislocations to the area can put someone at risk of paralysis, and let's look at why. So this is a cross-section of the side of a head, and what you're seeing here is you're seeing the cervical spine here. So this is your C1 to C7 vertebrae, and this one is the bony prominence on the back of your neck that you'll be able to feel as you go down your neck. When someone suffers an injury where there's a load from the top, we're worried about fractures and instability in these two vertebrae. And if you imagine, so that those two vertebrae, C1 and C2, are the most mobile, and it allows my neck to do all this different range of motion you're seeing me do right now. And in a case of a hit, for example, that Wolford sustained, these two can become fractured or move and become unstable. And if you see from the back here, look what runs through this area. You have your spinal cord. This is your spinal cord as a whole. You have other nerves that come off of it. You have blood vessels that go through the intervertebral foramens, and you have your brain up here. So it's actually quite concerning to have an instability in this area. Why did they take Wolford to hospital? Quite simply, they were worried about one of those acute fractures, dislocations, structural damage that could put him at risk of paralysis or even death. We have a few different tools that have been developed to help us figure out whether or not an injury is severe enough for us to do a C-spine or imaging of the neck. One of the scoring systems that was produced actually came out of Canada. There's two systems. There's the Nexus rule and there's the Canadian Cspine rule. The Canadian Cspine rule, this is an example of the Cspine rule. And essentially, if we go down this, we can figure out if Wolford needed to be imaged. So we start in the first box here. Any high risk factor which mandates imaging. So we're looking at anyone over 65, anyone with numbness or tingling in their extremities, because that's when you're worried about a nerve issue. And the last is a dangerous mechanism. So what's a dangerous mechanism? Well, let's go down and read it. They talk about a fall from greater than 3 feet. Then they talk about an axial load to the head, aka diving. In his case, I would completely 100% define that as an axial load. So in his case, he has a dangerous mechanism. I would be imaging both his head and C-spine, keeping him in that collar until I get that imaging released. Now, News reports have stated that Wolford has been released from hospital and didn't require an overnight stay. That means that likely his imaging was negative for any acute dislocations and fractures. So while Wolford likely didn't sustain a severe injury to the bones or the nerves and the structures around the area, it doesn't mean that he hasn't suffered from a soft tissue injury. I wanted you to be able to appreciate the amount of muscles that we carry in the area of our neck. And if you remember, his head was tilted to the right when that axial compression was applied, which means that these areas were stretched and these areas were compressed. So he could have a strain in any one of these muscles, really limiting him from being able to play. As the team doctor and the athletic trainer, I'm going to want to work with him to assess the areas around it. And before he can play, I would want him to be pain-free in all areas of motion. So looking back, front, left, right, up, and down. And so only then would I be able to clear him to play. Now, I can't say for sure how long he'll be out. It seems like this may be more of a soft tissue injury. However, we're going to have to wait for a little bit more information. And I will leave a comment down below once I get some more information about his outcome and injury. If anyone has any questions or comments about this injury, leave them down below. If you like the content of this video, please click on the like button. For those of you who want to stay up to date on videos where I break down injuries so that an average fan can better understand them, please subscribe to my channel. For now, that's all.